There we go. So I'm going to make sure people will get started right now. So people who've been on time are ready to join us. So anyways, hey, all right, guys, thanks for joining us. This is Rob Kalman. I think I've met a lot of you before, and some of you, hey, you put my picture up there. Pretty cool. I wasn't expecting that. So it's all right. It'd be a funny entry to my video for the night. But thanks for joining us. This is the sixth in a series of free meetups I'm doing for the Agile community in the Metro Detroit. If you're out of state, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I thought I'd keep everybody occupied and working from home. And some of you are actually getting back to the office, which is really cool as the state is starting to open up a little bit. So I own Michigan Technology Services, as you can see on the screen. We're in Farmington Hills, out of state. You know, we're Metro Detroit. We're a few minutes right outside of the city. We do a lot of Agile training and some coaching, as well as other IT courses. Pretty much whatever you think of with agility, from the Scrum Master to the product owner. The Agile Leadership is what we're going to talk about tonight. Just keep in mind, I'm recording the session. Some people emailed me just before and said that they couldn't make it tonight, and so they'll be able to watch. I'll upload it to LinkedIn and so just keep it in mind.
I think your record just skipped, Rob.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, but I think you're good now. So keep going.
I know. Pete's going to introduce himself, but it just as a little background. He and I have been working together for 4 years or so, and we've done a lot of Agile leadership courses in Metro Detroit. Some private courses, some public courses, and I'll let him. He's going to talk a little bit about that. The game plan is that he'll present for about 40 minutes. And then we're going to take some questions for about 20. And we use the chat feature. Some people are able to, chime in on the voice. Pete will let you guys know when. And then, we'll talk a little bit more afterwards. But Pete, if you want to start, I hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Rob. So I'd actually encourage you to chime in during. I'd rather have more of an interactive dialogue than just talking for 40 minutes. So don't be shy of writing a question in the chat window, Rob, if you want to kind of keep an eye on that.
Okay.
Just so we can kind of see that. And by the way, even if you chat, what I'll probably do is just tell you to unmute so we can actually hear your question and stuff. Well, I know some of you, I guess a number of you, maybe I'm based in Boulder, Colorado. As Rob said, we've been working together for about 4 years, but my journey started about 15 years ago in terms of coaching training. And, about 15 years before that in terms of just leading organizations trying to develop software and develop products and things like that. I've been involved in a number of Scrum Alliance programs. That's mostly my association in the Agile community is probably through the Scrum Alliance, although I'm quite familiar with most of kind of the different scaling models and all that kind of thing. And we'll share just a little bit about some of that. What I'm talking about today is a little bit more around Agile leadership. And the reason I came to focus around Agile leadership is I saw too many failures in terms of what was going on in organizations. And so I want to just share a little bit of that background and kind of what I saw and what I'm seeing today, even in terms of, I think a lot of failed Agile initiatives. So without further ado, let me just jump into kind of the problem, the way I see it. In a sense, what I often see organizations do is they bring in Scrum or Agile or Kanban or whatever, name your tool. And it comes into the organization and then it clashes with all the existing systems. And these could be structural systems, meaning, the roles and responsibilities and departments and divisions and locations and, all those structural elements you have in the organization. It might be the governance, policies, budgets, sign-offs, the documents, stage gates, all that kind of element. And it might even just be kind of how do we measure success? Does success mean we deliver on time? Does it mean we deliver on the cost, milestones, et cetera? So Agile comes in as a process, but it really gets, hit in a lot of different ways. And so what happens is it fades away. And I don't think this has changed much. Apologize, I've got a truck right outside my house. I don't see this actually has changing in the 15 years I've been teaching coaching, and even, you know, a number of years before that, actually trying to do. And so to me, this is a constant. And I think it's just something for all leaders to be aware of. This is going to happen in every system. Now, the question is, why does it happen? And those that have been through our class know this. You know, we've go over this a little bit. So I'm apologizing to some of you who have kind of gone through this, but maybe it's a good refresher too. This approach we talk about is what I call outside in. And what I mean by that is we come in as a process. We come in as a, hey, let's just work differently. And as soon as we start to do that, we start to hit the embedded systems that we just talked about. And essentially what we're realizing is Agile isn't just a process, it's a value set. It's a new way of thinking and working. And all of a sudden, the value set we have in our organization and the value set we have in terms of Agile coming in is what starts to essentially clash together. And I would argue this happens, you know, I think earlier on, I saw this happen bottom up, meaning teams implement Agile, and then they come up and they hit a ceiling of leadership and a ceiling of the system, and that can't change. But I'm seeing this just as much top down, where leaders say, let's go do Scrum, or let's do SAFe, or, you know, whatever it might be. And then they kind of just wipe their hands clean and say, I'm done. I set the initiative, the edict to go Agile. And they kind of let it go, and the same thing happens, right? They don't take responsibility for kind of that being done in a fine fashion. Just to give you an example of this, so think about in a sense your projects, and you start to think about traditional project management, and that's represented by this kind of linearly curved line, which basically says, all right, let's first figure out what to build. So I go down in my model first. I reduce what we call what uncertainty. And then what I'm going to do is track that project to define how to get something done. And so this, in a sense, what we're dealing with here is tracking the projects, the timelines, the budgets, the milestones, things like that. I'm not sure why my thing is drawing here. Let's try to stop that. Erase, clear. I'm not sure how I got into drawing mode. I'll try to stop that. But so think about this traditional project, right, which is kind of heading down and to the left in our model here, saying, let's solve the what first, and then we're going to solve the how. And one of the things we realize through that process is we start to manage to the project. We start to manage to what we define. And Agile's coming in with a totally different assumption. It's saying, you know, what we build is actually the most important risk, not that we build what we said we're going to build. And so they're coming at this with just a fundamentally totally different assumption. And so they act different. They integrate the what and the how. They in a sense, use feedback and pivot and do things like that. And so what we're seeing isn't just, oh, it's a different way of working. What we see is you take a step back behind this and say, how do we manage risk? What's the most important, measurement of success? How do you define success? And then you have to ask the question, who defines that in the organization? And the only ones that I know that actually do this are the leaders themselves that define this. And yet we bring Agile in and we expect Agile to fall into the same buckets, the same kind of risk management strategy that traditional is fitting into. And what do you get? You basically just get your traditional process relabeled with Agile terms. And so I think a lot of you probably have seen this and maybe are feeling it. And I'm sorry if you're kind of feeling that way, or if you're in a system that way. And so after this slide, I'm going to pause. So I want you to think about this for a second. And I want you to think about a question. So just prepping you, so you're not just going to sit there and listen to me. But turning this around, essentially, what I'm not going to suggest is we come in and we do a culture change. That's not my intent here. My intent is that leadership has to take responsibility. And so what we're going to talk about in an agile leadership world is leadership takes responsibility first and foremost for themselves. Like, who am I and how do I show up? And one of the things we'll talk about here is that organizations are going to model leaders. They essentially shadow. So if you think about this concept of the organization is the values are a shadow of the leader has to start with themselves. And we have to identify a value system that's going to align to Agile and connect to it so that we can actually build a system that's going to support Agile in the long run. So what I want to kind of illustrate here is this is not a major reorg. It doesn't require that. But what it does do is require leaders to be aware, leaders to understand their role, leaders to understand what does this mean for me both personally. So how I think and how I act actually shapes culture. And secondly, how we do this organizationally. And I'll share a little bit of this in terms of kind of just what we do, at risk of boring some of the people that have been through a class with me or some of the programs with us. Maybe I'll even ask you to illustrate or to share a little bit of your experience in that. But let me just pause here for just a second and give an opportunity for questions or just comments on this. So Rob, I don't know if you have a way to do that or whether we just have people jump in and unmute themselves and say, hey, I got something. I'd like to try to make it interactive as possible here before I go on.
Yeah, either use the chat feature or the, you gotta mute yourself for a second.
So I encourage anybody that's been to the class, share a perspective, or anybody that's got a question to share a question so far.
Hi, this is Liliana. So it's funny, Pete, how you mentioned that maybe for some of us who have been through this before, it might be elementary, but going back to those certain things, for example, today I worked with an executive team to identify a vision. And in this session that I facilitated, they came out with the culture to start and then everything that goes out. And until I saw this right now, I didn't realize that other people to see the importance of culture is hard. And how do we get to those conversations to be able to pull that out from our teammates, our organization, or whatever we're doing?
Yeah, thanks, Liliana, and awesome that you're focusing on culture. And I think even before that, what is culture? Culture is kind of a mystery. It's this shadow or fog, or it's a set of values. And what can I possibly do about culture? We're in a big company, and so yeah, I think leaders have a lot of fear around culture. And one of the things we try to do is demystify that, in a sense, give it some very simple terms. What does that mean? And in a sense, break that down so that you actually have some pretty simple levers to address and start to what we call shape culture, not change culture, shape culture. But thanks, yeah, appreciate that. Other comments, questions?
Hi, Pete. This is Sunita Rush from United Shore.
Yep, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay? It's very interesting just thinking about the agile culture. And at UWM, our bread and butter is our culture, right? One of the things that we do is we come into the organization understanding what the expectations are, and to hear the statement that was made about how we need to understand how leaders drive that culture. That really is eye-opening to me, and not only eye-opening, but it resonates much so with meeting our cultural organizationally and then the agile culture and thinking about how we represent those and deliver those messages top down. So thank you for bringing that into perspective.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And one of the things we can also think about is cultures at multiple levels. There might be a corporate culture. We can have team cultures. You might have, just give you an example of this, a retail company might have, like Target or Home Depot. You got one culture that runs the stores, and that's kind of this control culture where everything needs to be the same. Every store is the same. Processes are the same. But what tends to happen is a lot of companies will copy that culture and then apply it to IT, where we don't need that quite consistency. Yes, we need quality. Yes, we need predictability, but we need creativity and innovation in an IT organization. You don't need as much creativity and innovation in the store per se, to do that. So one of the dangers when you think about corporate culture is we copy paste that corporate culture everywhere across the corporation, even though it fits or not. And so, how do we start to shape some subcultures that, if we need to be more of an innovative organization, if we need to be more of a creative, I'll give you one example, Danske Bank, we did a lot of work with. And of course, the banking culture is, as many of you know, is a very, cut and dry, control culture. And yet to do a mobile division needed to be highly creative, highly innovative, highly quick. And so in fact, they had to and spawned a totally separate company to do that. And so there's lots of strategies in how you can shape culture, but recognizing how your culture might be a limitation or an asset is something definitely to recognize. Any last question before we move on? Appreciate the comments.
Hey, I had one.
Yeah, Chris.
Hey, how's it going? How do you think with the recent crisis or pandemic we have going on, do you think that there's going to be any shaping of culture just through these different circumstances?
Not only do I think it will, it already has, and it's shaping us whether we like it or not. And in fact, you're seeing a lot of, I'm seeing a dual response in terms of COVID. Response number one, I think some of the things I've seen, you've probably seen them too, and LinkedIn otherwise, COVID has moved your digital transformation, faster than any other initiative you've ever had, because it was a forcing factor, right? I heard a talk just yesterday dealing with the whole George Floyd case. Said basically there's three ways, to create social change. There's the voting of power and whatnot, but the third one is the pandemic, right? So how do you deal with that? So yes, this is definitely shaping culture. Now, in one sense, it's shaping culture of the lockdown and the control, and we can't, you Zoom, but in another sense, it's saying, wait a second, we've got to be
It's not me, right?
No, I think Pete just froze.
Oh.
Let's just go see what happens there.
Rob, can you just take over? That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, it's for sure, Rob.
Liliana, you did the count too. So let's figure out. I'm gonna text him and tell him you
all right.
froze.
I'm sorry.
Oh, he's back. Oh God, thank you, Pete.
I think I scared Liliana. Did we just lose him?
Liliana, I'd like to hear from you.
Oh, no thanks, Rachel. How about you first?
Oh, no.
All right, Rob, I'm
You
back.
first.
All right, he's back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I've been on Zoom all day, of course, and had no problems running sessions. And, when I get the most people on, the prototype fails. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if I got all my answer across there, but we'll jump up. But yes, COVID is shaping culture, and I do see it impacting both positive and negatively. Probably more positive than negative, I would say, in many ways. In fact, I think you would say we're expecting corporate culture to be impacted indefinitely with regards to office culture, training culture, and we're planning for that. And I'll share a little bit of how we're planning for that going forward. So let me just share a little bit about what we're doing in terms of the Agile leadership journey. And some of this might be somewhat new for some of you as well, in terms of, maybe gone through some of our Agile leadership programs, and we've been expanding our program. And I want to kind of share a little bit about what that looks like and why we're doing that. But we use this compass, and I think those of you that have known me have probably been familiar with this. And what this does for us is provide us some guidance for leaders. And what I mean by that is, when we use this compass, we're saying that it requires leaders to go first. And that's why we put leader at the top. is because we want leaders to kind of take the lead in saying, I need to be trained. I need to start to change the way I think and the way I act. And that's going to start to change the rest of the model. And what we see in most companies and most scaling frameworks is I teach how to deliver value faster. And while that's okay, what happens is it becomes a limiting factor because we run into all the culture, all the leadership, all the other dimensions. So when you can start with the leader and you start, in a sense, impacting the way they think and they act, they're the ones that then start to shape the culture that deliver the value. And we see this as a little bit more like a feeding system that builds upon itself, a flywheel, so to speak. So our approach here is to teach leaders, not to teach Scrum, not to teach, SAFe, is to teach leadership. And we focus what we call on two dimensions. One's called microculture. That's every day, the way I show up, the way I run a meeting, the way I make a decision, the way I talk to you one-on-one in a coaching conversation or in a feedback conversation, the way I talk to stakeholders, that's what we call microculture. And by the way, a great way to change an organization is through lots of microculture changes. And this is why when we do these private classes with a bunch of leaders together and we all start to change our microculture, that actually changes macroculture. And that's actually what we love about this is anybody that comes to our class, regardless of level, regardless of position, regardless of title, can take away some really positive intent about how I show up differently tomorrow. And that's what's really cool about this class. And then the second part is, as you get into those organizational dimensions, we also try to bring things down so that every leader at every level can apply certain levers at the organization. Certainly, senior leaders can create, much more leverage on the macro culture, but everybody can impact that. Now, the other thing I want you to be aware of here is that when we talk about Agile, I'm talking about both thinking Agile and acting Agile. What I mean by that is creativity is agility. It's agility of thought. It's agility of thinking. And the way we bring this out when we start talking about what does it mean to be an Agile leader, we actually start to get at the fact that you as a leader and how you think, if you, and this shows up in terms of politics all the time. Most of politics, what you see is Democrats and Republicans, whatever side of the fence you're on, you see it's a black and white issue. It's either immigration or not immigration. It's either Black Lives Matter or they don't matter, or, whatever it might be. There's a lot of these people that live in politics that work in a duality. And what we realize in life, most issues are not a black and white, right? There's shades of gray. And there's it's like saying, well, should we spend more time on strategy or should we spend more time on tactics? Well, the answer is yes, you need to do both. Should we engage our people more, or should I delegate more? Well, the answer is yes, right? There's not right and wrong. There's not, yes and no. Most of life, most of these, complex problems are shades of gray. And so when we start to think about what Agile leadership is, it doesn't start with, I can act quickly. It starts with, I can actually think differently. I can actually think a thought I hadn't thought before. I can actually, think of something different than, and so I'm malleable. I'm whatever they call that term in your brain that's plastic and can change. And certainly the action side is important, but the action side without the thinking side is kind of just, the hamster wheel in a sense. And so it's not very valuable without the creative thinking side. And so what we do in this workshop is, and this is probably something where I think we're doing a better job than we did even 2 years ago in the way we're teaching leaders, is helping leaders understand what it does and how it helps you as a leader to grow from what we call an expert leader, which is where most leaders are at. Expert, basically what that means is I focus on the work. I'm a subject matter expert. I've got, the knowledge about how to do stuff. And most of our first experience are there, but you see a lot of senior leaders stay in this, they know that they're just smart. And we got a lot of really smart leaders out there. Now, what's interesting is as you grow your leadership, you're not just growing, for example, going from I do work to I lead people to do work. And that's one of the shifts from expert to achiever. but you're actually going into more of an agile mode. And what we mean by that, and the reason we've illustrated this as two people, kind of this Russian nesting doll construct, is as I go from an expert to achiever, I'm actually adding a new layer. It's not discarding my old expert. It's adding a new competency that's built upon the expert that gives me new capability. It's like a new skin suit. It's a new superpower in a sense. And now all of a sudden, hey, I can be strategic and I can work with teams and stakeholders, and I'm focused on the customer and running projects. And all of a sudden you see this leader who's an achiever is super, right? They're awesome and they're getting stuff done and they get promoted. And in fact, sometimes they actually drop down and they have expertise and they can drop into those modes. And this is where we're seeing that this achiever leader is much more competent, much more capable, but in a sense still has a lot of the base they've developed from. Now it's interesting, and this is where a lot of kind of leadership management tops out in terms of how do we measure good leaders? What is a good leader? They get stuff done. They get projects done. They get budgets done. They hire people. You know, they work in the system and they get stuff done, to say it nicely. And that's usually, and yeah, they can communicate and they can listen and they can articulate and all those things that, you know, are in the typical skills assessment for leadership. What's interesting is when we start to get to this catalyst leadership realm. Of course, my garbage truck comes right now too. So when we start to get to this catalyst leadership realm, what we're starting to see is yet a new layer that develops on this catalyst leader. And only about 10% of our leaders really start to hit this extremely well. I still am 10 years into this and find myself struggling between these. But what's interesting about this catalyst leadership shift is, yes, I start to focus more broadly. I start to see the whole system. But what's really interesting is I start to shift from I know the answers, I know how to lead this, to this concept of, maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't have the best answer. Maybe, you know, and this is what we call vulnerability, or this is what you call humility. This is a significant shift. And this is where we're really starting to see Agile values take off, because this is where you start to get empowerment. This is where you start to get engagement. This is where you start to get, you know, collaboration and working together and all these pieces. But again, one of the myths is catalyst leaders are soft. Catalyst leaders, you know, what do you need? You know, I'm here to serve you. And that's not this at all. This is a very active, engaged leader that we look at, that starts to embody and empower the fact that, hey, maybe I can change. Maybe I'm not done here. Rob, I'm noticing some chats here. So do we have some questions, or are we getting other things that are going on here?
Gonna take a look at it. You're asking about the sound. It seems it's okay.
So another pause point here. So by the way, what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of share this piece. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing online and how we're adapting some of our things online. So if you have some questions about the program, I've got one or two more things to talk about there. And then I'm going to kind of get into what we're doing as far as COVID and some of those things as well. So just kind of one last thing here. A lot of you are probably working with scaling methods, whether it's SAFe, Scrum at Scale, LESS. I don't necessarily have a problem with them, but what I see a lot of times happening is companies are going to them as kind of the simple go-to solution, and they're not delivering the results they're expecting. And we see this a lot. A lot of people come to us, organizations come to us and say, you know, we're doing SAFe, but, you know, we kind of hit this plateau, or we're doing Scrum at Scale and we hit this plateau. And what's happening is these frameworks are not touching or not impacting enough this leadership mindset. The one way you can think about the Agile leadership journey, it's really a way to scale mindset and behaviors to shape this culture. And to me, that's actually an enabler of any scaling method, or none at all. We actually don't teach a scaling method. We teach patterns and you know, just managing change. But even if you were to use a scaling method, an Agile leadership mindset will help along that way. So that's the way we like to talk about this. It's either frameworkless or it's a way to scale that mindset and framework. And if you are associated with the Scrum Alliance, just to let you know, there is a change going on here in the Scrum Alliance world. In the past, we were aligned directly with the Scrum Alliance. They have what's called the Cal 1, which is the awareness, what we call our awareness workshop. And that is kind of a 2-day in-person, or, I'll talk a little bit about how we run that online. But then there's this practice program, and Liliana, I think here, is the only one I saw anyways, that's been through our I think when you did it, it was a 12-month program. We've broken that up now into 2 6-month programs. And that's aligned with the Cal 2 framework. Now, there is a change that's going on in the Scrum Alliance. I don't know if you're aware of this. It's kind of midstream being rolled out. They're actually breaking the Cal program into 3 parts. The reason they're doing that, and I'm part of that committee, so I'm part of the change process here, is they recognize there's actually 2 Cal programs out in the world today. And if you were to go to different Cal educators, you're likely to get 2 different very types of classes. And so this is kind of a way to recognize that that's happening, and they're supporting it happening and are trying to make it more flexible. So what you're seeing here is essentially both classes share the middle one, which is what's called the leadership mindset that I've been talking mostly about here. But then there's a split. And when we start talking about your context as a leader, what do I focus on? Our program has mostly been focused on the O side, the organizational culture and change design. We call that our shaping culture awareness workshop. But then there's this other path that a lot of Cal educators are teaching, which is a little bit more like programs and teams level Agile leadership, which is like, I'm still in a system. I'm not changing policies. I'm not doing culture, but I got to get teams of teams working together. And we also have a program like that in our Agile leadership. We call it the MAP, Management Agility Program. We do privately mostly for our clients. But what's interesting is the Scrum Alliance is kind of making this shift, and we're staying along those lines as well. So that's something to kind of look for as you see coming up here in the next month or 2. And so the last piece I'll do before I pause is to kind of just share a little bit about what you might not be aware of is the concept that we have both what we call the awareness workshops, and these are the ones we've been running in person for many years. In the last 3-4 months, we've moved those to be online, and I'm going to share more about that. But then we also have our practice programs, and we have 2 of those programs. Liliana here has done both of them actually, and these are all online, weekly engagement, full what we call 360s and tools, and you work on actually going very deep into some of these in terms of your practice. So I'm going to pause there again and just give a chance to reflect. If there are questions, jump out or jump up. And if there are comments, or either chat it or jump in.
Don't be bashful, guys. I know there's a bunch of you who've done this stuff, so you can all chime in. I'm watching the chat function, and you're perfectly free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. I know there's a lot of people, but it's a friendly group. I know most of you.
Hi, I'm Abhi Banerjee. I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, in Agile leadership, do you see this as a role in an organization? Because if you look at a Scrum team, there is no place of like a manager, right? Mm-hmm. So at a team level, maybe at a program level, at these different levels, is this a role, or is it a set of skills that anybody can apply to their current role?
Yeah, we really love to use the ship, right? So when you think about Agile leadership, and so that for us means anybody has influence. So take as an example, you're on a team and you have somebody on your team is the expert at, XYZ, doesn't matter, right? They're the expert database person, they're the expert on, the business process, whatever. That person is shaping the culture of that team. And whether or not you're an official title, whether or not you're an unofficial title, you shape culture around you, microculture mostly. And what we talk about is we teach skills, both mindset, how am I showing up? What is my bias? How is that bias, coming across and impacting everybody else? Social awareness. How does this bias apply in this situation? Situational awareness. And so it's just common basic tools of just yourself, situational and social awareness that anybody can apply, as a father of kids, as a spouse, as a coworker, anywhere in a system. Now, obviously, as you go up in an organization, you have more status power. So you're naturally going to be influencing more people. But irregardless of that status power, the tools, the mindset, the techniques are all the same. So we really like when we can teach leaders all across the organization. And, we teach from CEO. We've got some people in our classes that are CEO, CTO, CFOs. We got people in our classes that are, I'm a business analyst, and they all find tremendous value in the leadership tools and techniques. Anybody I guess I'll just make a comment here. Anybody that's been through the program want to comment on that? We have a number of people here on Zoom that have been through at least the awareness part.
Yeah, this is Liliana. So my given title at my place of work is a business analyst. And I have done anything from being an agile adaptation coach to a team coach to working with, C-level suite to write vision. So it's really given me as a business analyst other things to work with.
Thanks, Liliana. Any other comments on that or questions? Let's see, I took the CSM class. This is from Arshind. I took the CSM class as a Scrum Master. What will I gain from the Cal class? 100%. We don't teach Scrum, number one, so we don't do anything we would have taught. Now, the overlap might be if they taught any kind of, maybe mindset on servant leadership, things like that. But in a sense, our focus and tool set is probably about 95% outside of what you're going to learn in a Scrum class. And the way we talk about this is we're here to help you create a culture in an organization that enables Scrum to be effective. And I'm a CST, past CST. I used to teach Scrum for about 10 years, Scrum Master, product owner. And the reason that I created this class back in 2011 is primarily because everybody that came to the class is, my manager needs to hear this. My manager needs to hear this. So I'm like, okay. The problem is they would never come to a Scrum Master class. They would never go to a product owner class. Now, some of them do, and I appreciate and applaud them for doing so. And there are some Scrum trainers in the world that says, all managers, all leaders need to go to a Scrum Master class. It's like, really? You're going to get the CEO? And most of them won't. So by developing a leadership class, you really kind of help them know, okay, what is your role? You're not going to necessarily do Scrum. You are, good to go know about it, but we don't teach that. But we do teach other things that help that. So in fact, what I find in this class too, everybody that comes to the class tends to say when they get done with the class, my manager needs to hear this. And we hear that all the way up the chain. Even CEOs say, our board needs to hear this. So it's valuable way outside the Scrum Master class. So yeah, so your manager attending the Cal class with you as a prerequisite? Yes, do so. Glenn raised his hand, I think I saw. Was that Glenn?
Yeah. So I just wanted to, Jeff, you're saying a lot of the things that my organization, we're doing, we're preaching the mindset, preaching that it's focusing on those types of things. Some people know I work for a German organization and very focused at a tool set level. They want to know the tools. And when we preach mindset and how that relates to how that leadership builds and then they can make the changes, they still shift and say, well, just tell me how to do it at a tool set level. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's a really good question. And a lot of times, you get into these kind of like leadership mindset culture, and it really gets esoteric really quickly. And that's something we actually pride ourselves on. In fact, one of the quotes I love more than anything that we get in these classes is, For years I've been told what not to do. Don't micromanage, and, don't tell the teams what to do. And, finally, from this class, we've been told what to do. We've been given tools. So I'm not sharing all those tools with you here, and I encourage you to go to the Agile Leadership Journey. We put a list of all the kind of the tools and techniques we use, but both for personal, and this is something I've done a lot, is like, I can't deliver, so I'm not going to give you something to teach you how to do it. So whether that's what we call catalyst conversations, whether that's, what is my focus, what we call catalyst habits. We even have something now we call, and this is new for those of you that haven't been in the program the last year or so, catalyst feedback, and how we provide feedback. But that's on the leadership side. But then on the culture side, we have very specific tools for mapping culture, very specific tools for getting into some structures and policies and measures and how you tweak them, and what we call a catalyst canvas. That's new, by the way, for some of you that used to use the V2 MOM. We've been modifying that too. But yeah, so I appreciate the question, Glenn, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that there's some very tangible, pragmatic tools that we do teach to help leaders.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, good question. So just yes, was there one more?
There's 3 more chat questions. I can read them, or you can read them if you want to.
Chris said he got a CEO for a half day for Pete, and we did a good job. Awesome, thank you. What are the pitfalls when a company combines delivery lead with Scrum Master role? That seems like half-ass commitment by upper management. Sorry about being blunt. I love the bluntness. Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, how do I want to answer this one? The role of Scrum Master and Delivery Lead are completely antithetical, and I think you're recognizing that. It's kind of like coming in as a Scrum coach, and oh, by the way, I'm the consultant helping you deliver this project. It's like McKinsey trying to help you be Scrum when their job is to actually deliver the project. What wins? The project wins. So what's going to happen is, if I'm a delivery lead and I'm a Scrum Master, unless you have a really, really good mindset, a really strong mindset that you can keep these two things separate, it's going to most likely beat people up, in which case the delivery lead gets the push, which means I drop from what we call, when we kind of go into this mode of catalyst, it probably pushes me into what we call the achiever mode, because my delivery engine says I got to deliver, I got to hit the timelines, I got to hit the budget. All those things start to take over, and the concept of change and improvement and culture and some of the things take a back seat. So this is one of the reasons why, in Scrum, we separate product owners and Scrum Masters. So yeah, I think, Cindy, you're recognizing the problem, and I'm on your side with that. And so I'd be happy to, share a dialogue with leaders if you want to talk more about that. So my leadership thinks, this is from Brian, that they support Agile but still want traditional things like long-term plans, monthly performance against budget, et cetera. How do I convince them they've missed the mark? Yeah, that's a good question, Brian. And let me just come back up to this picture here. And a lot of people ask, when do we turn the Agile switch on? And if we're, a lot of leaders want this kind of like 2-path. I want the Agile path and I want my traditional path. And when we got something uncertain, I'll use the Agile path. When I know what we're doing, we'll use the traditional path. And I think that's a really big mistake. And again, that goes to black and white thinking. That goes to, one's better, one's worse. What I actually we work with leaders is to talk about, think of this like a dial, not a switch. So not all programs need a Agile at the 10 level dial. I don't need, massive pivoting and uncertainty and everything's a spike and I'm in a research mode. Although there are some teams that do pure research and are living up in that very, very 10 level Agile. But also there's very little down at the 1-2 Agile where it's like, yep, we got everything. We know what we're doing. We're just going to roll it out because, frankly, it's a complex technical and ecological system. So what I try to think about with stakeholders is say, okay, let's put ourselves on the grid here. If 1-2 Agile means, we've got all this stuff locked and loaded, and 10 Agile, we know what we're doing, and that scales both on what and how we're doing this. Where do we live? And that's an interesting dialogue. And all of a sudden we can say, okay, if we're a 6-7 Agile here, how much uncertainty do we have? How much pivoting do we going to need? How much, buffers are we going to require versus at that 2-3 level Agile? Less. So I like to have a concept with leadership that isn't about, do we need budgets? Do we need long-term plans? It's more about how uncertain is our environment for this situation? What do we need to and I would draw from both traditional and Agile in that case. And that's another way we talk about being pragmatic. There are good tools out there. And, having a strategic vision is still a good thing. Putting together budgets is still a fine thing to do, but we just can't lock those systems down. Let me just cover a little.
Can I just add to that a little bit? So are you saying then that because our company has been doing Agile development for many years, and, of course, I've seen both good and bad executions. But, typically our budgets are not Agile, right? So if the team, we had to, in order to just even get the team, right, we had to give, estimates and I've seen situations where teams have kind of gone off the rails, or they've headed down, rabbit holes, and then they kind of lost sight of the whole vision, and then we end up in a situation where we have to justify continuing the project, and so I'm almost to the point where we almost need to say, okay, well, if you're going to can stand up a brand new application and with brand new technology, you need to establish a rule of thumb that, hey, this is a minimum X time frame to get it done. But then on the other hand, that's also not very Agile, right? Because you need to fail fast, right? But it's I can't tell you how many times we've had to have conversations where it was well, we gave you our requirements, you gave us a time frame, why isn't it done yet?
Yeah.
But I kind of like the idea of well, how much do we know up front, and kind of saying, well, if there's a lot of uncertainty, then guess what? The money, the budget that we told you is, this is our percentage of likelihood of meeting that goal. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And the one and done thing is we should be way past the, hey, you got one time to ask for money and this is it. I mean, we know that's really kind of stupid. That's a lot of the way the finance world still works. Finance tends to be one of the most difficult Agile parts of most companies still today. There is a great group out of Zurich that's building what they call Agile procurement. So it's a specialty. And that's actually, they're kind of a partner of our Agile leadership journey, because we teach and we do a lot on the financial side, but they're actually doing some really creative things on kind of how that procurement process works. Just to kind of simplify this down a little bit, even a shorter waterfall is more Agile, than a longer waterfall. So, you can use a lot of techniques that are just, well, let's do a shorter project. Let's budget for the next 3 months and let's review that, right? You can get at risk management. Isn't it less risky to actually just give you 3 months worth of money than 2 years worth of money? Because then we can do a check and give you 3 months more and make a decision later. I mean, you get down to it, and there's some pretty logical reasons it's actually less risky taking an empirical approach than making all your guesses when you know the least. But yet most of our systems are best built on guessing and just, putting the budgets together. So yeah, I think we're all talking the same challenge. And that's why we love, by the way, in our workshops to get financial people, regulatory people, compliance people, underwriters. All of those people are lovely to get in this class, because all of a sudden you get some really great dialogue on the different systems and controls and risk and what is risk. Those are fun. But I want to finish by, don't let COVID stop you. In fact, we're finding COVID is a great opportunity to disrupt change. And COVID is not an excuse to be collaborative and especially to learn as a leadership team. So we made the switch over to online education, but we actually did this before COVID. We were on this path because our clients were pushing on us on this path. Now, primarily our clients were pushing us this way because it was more climate friendly. They wanted less travel for some of our clients. We actually find it's a higher retention. What I mean by that is not people staying in the class longer. a higher learning retention. I remember things more because of the way we've run our online programs. And what we didn't do, a lot of our training peers have just kind of said, okay, 2 days Zoom, let's go. And we're like, hell no, that's not what we're going to be doing on this. So what we've done essentially is we've done a few things. One is we've brought it down to really small cohorts. And so what we find is if you get, somewhere between 8 to 10 people in a class, you can't hide. You can't check out and, not be on Zoom, and people miss you. And so by creating really small classes that all have a guide that are taking you through this, all of a sudden make this really interesting and fun. We don't do 25-person, Zoom classes. The second thing we do is we don't make you leave work. And so what we're doing is we're saying, hey, let's treat this like a university class. We've got 90-minute sessions, usually 3 days a week. Sometimes we do 2 days a week. Sometimes we do one. We can customize this for private classes. But essentially, let's just pick a time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we actually for a 2-day class, we spend a month. So we actually spend 3 days with you for a 2-day class, because everything online takes longer, but we actually go a lot deeper. And what's interesting is we combine this with what we call pre-work. And so there's some self-paced stuff like videos you watch and reflection you do. And what we're hearing from leaders is the format is a really interesting format, because you start to really dive in, and we can focus most of our sessions on talking and sharing, not just teaching what we're doing. And we use a very collaborative workspace. I don't know if you've seen or used Mural, but through a class, we have basically about 24 mural boards that we go through. And these are takeaways at the end of the class. And these are dynamic, sticky note, move stuff around, play, model, share, collaborate types of things. And so we create this really intimate, fun, collaborative workspace. And here's just a couple of kind of testimonials from people that have gone through the class. And what they're telling us is this is better than an in-person 2-day class. And I agree with them. And I read an article on Forbes that says corporate education probably never needs to go back to the classroom. And I'm almost there with that. There's certain energy that happens in a classroom. There's certain energy when you get a bunch of people together. But what we're finding is incredibly intimate and powerful experience online. And I just encourage you to kind of check it out, look at it. We customize customize private programs. And, I'm running about 3 or 4 of them for clients right now. We're even willing to run, we can modularize this to say, hey, let's just take, Rob and I are doing for a client, we're just taking 4 modules. Let's just put this in front of the leaders. What do you think? And do you want to do more? So it's kind of like an Agile project. You can decide to take 4 and okay, let's do 4 more. So what's really cool about this is it basically allows us to deliver in an Agile fashion the whole curriculum. So it's been a lot of fun. So I'll pause there. I know we've got just a few minutes left. And I'll just kind of open it up to additional questions and comments. Trying to see if there's any others here, Rob, I missed.
No, it looks like that's it. Hey, I'm getting a lot of thank yous and great questions, great info.
What's the quote on Pete's wall? Okay, let me change my setting here. So my partner, if you know me, my partner is, she, like, I tell her, like, no more words, because our whole house is full of words here. So this is a quote you'll probably all will know. Let me see. So I can zoom in on that. Oh, see if I can get that. There you go. Can you read it? Change is inevitable, growth is optional. Other questions?
Well, I'll wrap up a few things for you. Pete, I'm going to say thank you for joining us. And for all of you guys out there on the Zoom call and the chat, and thank you. If you have questions, you've got Pete's numbers there. Everybody's got my phone number, my email, michiganagiletraining.com. I promise I won't spam you guys. You guys get enough contact from me. But if you guys need anything else, reach out to me. And we have a few seconds left. I mean, if anybody has to go, I know at 6 o'clock people typically want to head out for dinner with the family. But if anybody wants to stick around for a few minutes, Pete, if you want to take a couple minutes, otherwise, I'd say thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for everybody showing up. Appreciate it.
And I'll upload the video in a day or so. Free to go if anybody else has any questions.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jason.
Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank
Jason.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ali.
you.
Got the kids. Love it.
Yes, working from home, right? With 2 working parents and a baby. So that's the reality of where we're at now.
Awesome. That's awesome. It's good to see you, Liliana. Thanks for joining.
Yes, thank you. You're amazing as always.
Pete, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm sitting at my desk and I have some images behind me. I don't know if they look familiar from when you were at United Shore, but I keep them hanging behind my desk. Yeah.
You know what's kind of sad is I actually don't draw too many flip charts online. We do a lot more in Mural, and I draw on this iPad and stuff like that. So yeah, my markers are getting a little lonely right now.
I have no doubt that when you do pick them back up, it'll probably be just as good.
It'll be magic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a lot of people from United Shore, so thanks, Rachel, for being such a great advocate.
Of course. You've done a great job for us, and I know we've continued to grow, so we had a lot of leaders that were able to go through, the original Cal when you came on site in Troy, and we've grown so big, we're in Pontiac now. So we got a much larger building, many more leaders to kind of go through this journey. So
awesome. Yeah, that's really good to hear.